everyone, welcome. Welcome to the Automated AI in the Arts workshop. Thanks for coming. So glad you could join us today. So my name is Rachel Barrera. I'm the operations manager for the NYC Media Lab, and I will be moderating this workshop today. So just wanted to give a rundown on the workshop. So we'll have our speakers take the stage for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll definitely have time for Q&A afterwards. We'll have about 15 minutes or so for Q&A. So if you have any questions that pop up during the session, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box on the right, or feel free to write them in the chat. We'll definitely make sure to get to those afterwards. Okay, so I will go ahead and introduce our two awesome speakers today. So we have Bram Adams. Hi, Bram. Welcome. Bram is the founder of Stenography, a company founded in March of 2021 that uses AI to make code accessible to everyone. In addition, In addition, Bram is also developer ambassador at OpenAI. Prior to this, he was a creative technologist at Otherside AI, developer advocate and education engineer at Algolia, and was a software engineer at HBO. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from the University of Rochester.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yash Dani, he is also a developer ambassador for OpenAI. He is a software engineering student at Waterloo with an interest in building compelling products. He's interned at a few companies as an engineer and is interested in music production, marathon running, and web development. So thank you both for coming. Give him a round of applause. And I will just pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thanks, everyone. Wow, really feeling the love.
Yeah, the clap emojis are really doing it for me too. I love it. So we actually have a presentation that we prepared for you. So I'm going to jump over into screen share mode. Is that visible? Is it showing up?
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay, great. So as Rachel mentioned, I'm Bram Adams.
And I'm Yash Dani.
You want to say anything, or I was gonna take it. And today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence in the arts. And this title is actually a little bit of a trick because we're actually going to be talking about the art of reading and writing code. So the first thing that we want to talk about are what is coding and what is machine learning. So coding is probably a bit more familiar to people in general. Coding is writing instructions, which is a set of steps on a computer to do something. So that could be loading a YouTube video, that could be loading up a map and typing in GPS instructions, that could be ordering food from an app like DoorDash, that could be writing a program that does a for loop, et cetera, et cetera. These are a bunch of judgment calls that programmers make when they're writing algorithms, and that's the kind of process of coding. Machine learning, on the other hand, is teaching a computer to make these judgment calls and predictions. So the most common example of this is when you see a picture of a cat, you can kind of just intuit after seeing a few cats as a young person when you're growing up that this is also a cat because it shares the features of a cat, but you might not be able to roughly define the differences between the fact that a dog has fur and a cat has fur, but this one is obviously a cat. So machine learning is teaching a computer to make these judgment calls as well without having to manually program these into the machine.
Just before we move on, I noticed some people were mentioning in the chat that the slides are a little hard to see. Is it good now,
sorry.
or can everyone see okay? Should we zoom in?
Let me see.
Very hard to see.
Okay, hold on. How do I zoom in on presentation mode?
Is this better? I think someone just popped it up.
Yeah, I popped it up.
Okay, lots of thumbs
I popped it up a little bit. Okay, perfect.
Better?
Okay, sweet.
Sorry, my screen is on the other screen, so I can't really see the chat.
Oh, yeah. No worries.
We're good? Okay.
Yes. So yeah, talking about machine learning and coding, that kind of brings us to Codex itself, which is this model that OpenAI released in 2021. It's this incredibly large machine learning model that's been trained on literally billions of lines of code. And because of that, it's really, really good at reading, understanding, and writing code. And particularly, one of the things that I think you guys will find really cool is you can use natural language, like just everyday English, and basically translate that into code. And we have a ton of examples and cool demos to show you. So let's just move on to that. So this is writing code. So in this example, basically what's happening is in the sort of provide instructions box at the bottom there, we're giving Codex some instructions in completely natural language. And then on the right, it shows you all of the code that it's writing for us based on those instructions. And then at the top there, it shows the application we make, which is this blog app. So basically what we're doing here is as it loops up forward, is we're asking it to create a form to submit blogs. And we just write that and hit click. It automatically writes all the code for us, and it automatically creates that form. Then we ask it to, on submitting the form, create a bunch of blog posts and post them on the feed. So we write some content in there, hit submit, and now we have a bunch of blog posts on our feed. It looks really rudimentary, so let's ask it to use a more modern font. And you can keep going with this, keep trying to style it, keep adding more features until you have a fully fledged blog app. But the point here is that writing this up and writing all of that code literally took no time at all and really no effort on my part. I just asked it to make a form for me and to set up a blog field. And that's kind of where the magic of Codex comes in. You're using everyday English and translating it into this complex code without really needing to understand how any of this code works.
And you can see the code also being written here on the right, on this generated code on the right-hand side of the screen.
Right. And you can use it, for a bunch of other stuff as well. It doesn't just have to be for creating websites. Like, for example, here, what I'm asking Codex to do is to display my webcam on the page and add direct live text-to-speech transcription right on the page itself.
And now we are able to create real-time closed captioning with a live video feed in under 30 seconds.
I apologize, it's a bit small, but on the bottom left there, as I was talking, it was translating exactly what I was saying into text and displaying it right on screen.
Captioning.
And you'd think that speech-to-text processing, webcam, video processing, all this stuff is pretty complex, but it only took me one piece of instruction in English, and we were able to get that set up.
So I also wanted to kind of highlight a little bit about where I think the flexibility of a model like Codex comes in. So a lot of the time when we're dealing with code, we're thinking in terms of data structures. We're thinking in how can I, that's supposed to be on the next slide. There we go. We think in terms of data structures. We think, how can I manipulate this JSON? How can I make this data structure load quicker? How can I make this website have this database kind of structure, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think Codex is a tool to help us with our creative endeavors by helping us think about data more broadly. We can think about things like image manipulation, as like you're seeing here with something like a Photoshop. So if you don't want to be stuck into a tool like a Photoshop, you can think, oh, let me just edit the image directly with my words and let code take care of it for me. In the video, it's just a collection of images. So now you're like, oh, now I can do video editing. And then you think about audio, and you're like, well, that's also a collection of zeros and ones that are going through a computer. So I can edit audio as well. So the potentials with this kind of stuff is pretty limitless, and it actually will continue to get more exciting in the future as more people write interesting libraries that can be used to feed these machine learning models and help us create some really cool things with code. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the art of reading code. So a little bit of yin and yang between reading and writing code. They kind of lead into each other and have an interesting relationship, because to be able to read code, you have to write code, and to be able to write code, you have to be able to read code. So I think the interesting thing about writing code versus writing prose is that with code, you actually have two audiences. You have other people who are going to be reading your code, and you have computers. So computers up first. Computers read binary. They read zeros and ones. They don't have a conception of structures the same way that people do. When we see words on a paper, then we also see paragraphs and sentences and kind of build them up at the same time. If you actually slow down and notice how you might even read something like under the hood, binary is converted through logic gates. A lot of us read left to right, but we usually chunk words together semantically. But computers don't do that. They just read 1 1 1 1 0 1 1 0 1 1 1 over and over. So under the hood, this is converted through logic gates, which are kind of electrical gates of ors and ands, where these things called transistors basically sit, and computers just like to move logic around. They turn lights on and off. But writing this binary is pretty hard. So we created programming languages to abstract this process for us, all the way up to things like JavaScript, but also Python, Fortran, C, Haskell, all these different programming languages for different goals of the authors who wrote it. But the main thing to think about is that we wrote these programming languages to be converted back into binary from computers to understand. So the second audience is other humans. A programmer must keep in mind their fellow programmers. Writing clean code is a necessity. It's about writing readable code, leaving comments, and making it easy for people who are going to be reading it in the future. And the people includes the author themselves. So, the machine learning models that we have today actually give us a lot of control over this process as well, because as Yash had mentioned earlier in the presentation, they're trained on lines of code. So in theory, they understand code, correct? So Stenography is actually a company that I built that is focused on this problem. It's focused on the art of understandability of reading code. It's what happens when you see a block of code and you can convert it into plain English, and then what do you do with that plain English? What does it mean to be plain English? Who's reading it? Who's your audience? How can we make things easier to understand? How can we point them to the correct documentation? Why is this code doing what it does? How does it do it? What libraries is it using? What language is it in, et cetera, et cetera. This helps with communication with ourselves, communication between the two audiences that I mentioned of letting computers read code while letting humans understand language the way that we do, but also helping inter-team communication with intercode. So here's an example of me using the Chrome extension of Stenography, which is written on top of the API. So what this is doing is it's highlighting some code on some documentation for Cloud We Go, and then it's telling us what the code does in plain English, and it's linking us to some popular questions for that. So the idea is that, again, what you're seeing with this code is that it's really just based around logic. It's this RPC timeout being set to a variable and all these things that you have to store in your brain. But it's really easy for people to understand natural language of what is this code doing? I just want to know. And then it tells you, well, it's waiting 3 seconds before sending a request. And then you can go to Stack Overflow to get some more information about that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we also take some time to highlight just how extreme this rate of change has been with progress. Bram and I have shown you some really, really incredible demos where we've gotten AI to understand code really well, to be able to write code really well. But we got here really, really quickly. Roughly a year and a half ago, there was this really large language model released called GPT-3, which at the time, or maybe still is, like the largest language model in the world. And people were trying to get that AI model to write code too, and it was significantly less effective. You could get maybe 1 in 10, 20, 30 times you could get it to write code that actually runs. But then fast forward like a year later, investing those resources into Codex and with tools like Stenography, we've gotten so much better at reading and writing and understanding code with AI in such a short period of time. And if there's anything to take away from this presentation or any reason that you should care about this, whether you're a programmer or not, is that the future is like, I have no idea what's going to happen. Bram and I are dev ambassadors. We spend so much time thinking about these things. Yet every week I have office hours where people from completely non-technical backgrounds come in and make demos that honestly blow me away. And that's what's so exciting about this space. You don't have to be a software engineer to understand how to tell a computer what to do in natural language. And that's why I think all of you should care. If anything, we need more people from really diverse backgrounds in this space coming up with cool demos that software engineers wouldn't necessarily think of. And that's kind of the point here is I hope that, whoever you are, whatever your background is, you take an interest in this and try making some cool stuff, because there's a ton of stuff out there that none of us have seen yet. And I can't wait to see what you build. So, oh yeah, you guys like that one? But no, seriously. And so because of that, if you find any interest in this, check it out, at least try playing with it. And there's a very, very high likelihood that because of your different background than ours, you'll come up with something that we haven't seen either. And that's kind of what I want to say on that. Bit of a rant, but definitely check it out. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. We'd love to answer any questions you may have.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you both for that awesome presentation. And please, audience, if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to write them in the chat box or ask a question in the Q&A. That was really, really good. Somebody said the civic tech space needs this. Jerry, thank you for your comment. Somebody also agreed. Civic tech space is a really good idea. All right, so we do have we're getting a lot of
ton of questions.
Yeah, a ton of questions. So I'll start with the first one. Does natural language code risk coders who are writing code?
I'll take this one.
Go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I thought a lot about this particular problem in terms of existential risk and local risk. And basically, what I mean by existential risk is what is the role of a coder in a world where machines can write code? And the localized risk is, you go into your job one day and they tell you, oh, well, we have the computer writing the software that you were writing today. I think that both of those risks are reasonable. Having played around with Codex and been in the process of building stenography, I've been very impressed by what these tools do. But I will say that they are collaborators more than replacements. I think that most of the time that I work with stenography, in particular because I'm way more familiar with stenography, but also GitHub Copilot when I'm writing my own code, I feel like it doesn't still have that kind of creative spark to be able to create something from scratch and know why it's creating something, right? So even though it's trained on this massive corpus of data, if anything, it's just a better tool for these machine learning models provide us better tools for retrieval of correct information and less about we're just fully replacing humans. Now, in the future, I don't know if that will always be the case. It might even get better at that specific part that I'm talking about as well. But currently, I think that these tools are definitely a boon to software engineers and people who are learning to code and people who are experts at coding all up and down the spectrum, and people who are just interested in learning to code. I think this is a really great time to be involved in general.
I completely agree with that. And all of the workflows that I've seen with AI in creative fields, because I do consider software engineering to an extent like a pretty creative thing, has been more of a symbiotic relationship rather than one where one is trying to replace the other because of that creativity aspect to it. And in the future, who knows, could be famous last words for me to be like, oh, we'll just work together and then I'm out of a job, I guess. But for now, that's what it seems like.
Awesome. I have another question from Roger Kenny. How does someone get started with GPT-3?
I can take this one. So Roger, there is kind of like this OpenAI private beta system where you can apply for an invitation. If you go to OpenAI's website, openai.com, you can apply there. Once you're in, we have like a community forum where you can ask questions. There's a bunch of examples for you to play around with. There's a playground. There's a really, really good onboarding process there. So I think once you're on, you'll probably have a great time. And if you're ever stuck, you can book time with either Bram or I whenever, and we'll be happy to walk you through whatever you want to do and try our best to help.
Perfect. Stephen C. asked, he said, very cool and inspiring. Are there any gotchas to consider when using GPT-3?
Yes, I'd say that the biggest gotcha that gets people is that they set their expectation too high because they get impressed by the first thing that comes out of these machine learning models. I feel like when you're exploring with a tool like a GPT-3, it's a lot about suspending your disbelief because when it does work, it'll knock your socks off, but there'll be a lot of times where it doesn't work and you'll be like, oh, but you just worked before. Why don't you continue to work? And unfortunately, machine learning models don't think like we do. So I think the big part of the challenge and a big part of the fun is trying to contort the way that your brain thinks about solving problems into a way that GPT-3 might understand the world. And when you find that gold mine and when you find those solutions, you can find some really cool answers.
Awesome. Maria asked, can you talk about how stenography was trained?
Yes. So most of it is off of Codex and GPT-3. I think that a big competitive advantage of OpenAI's business model is that they spend all of their time hiring the best research scientists in the world and using the best data that they can get their hands on. And I think as a solo founder, which I currently am, a stenography and working by myself on this project, it would be really unreasonable to have to go and train these models. That said, I do have some models that I've trained, small models that help point in the right direction for things. And I think, a big part of Yasha's point about creativity, specifically in the AI space, is finding creative little things that you can jump into. So the thing that I like to talk about with stenography is I'm actually working on an endpoint right now for the API that starts to semantic search link different code explanations together. So usually in a code base, you'll have this function calling that function and this one taking in that import and doing all these different things. And it will look like you read it in a linear fashion in a file, but really it's kind of like a garden. It's like a tree. It's a graph of different things relying on different things in your code base. And if you pull out any one part, you break the whole system. So having a good idea of how all that works is one of the reasons that software engineers get paid so much. And if you talk about bus loads at like company where it's like, oh, someone leaves the company and they take all the knowledge with them, and then our system breaks and we're, Facebook is down for 2 days because David doesn't work here anymore. And he was the one who set that up. So being able to untangle that mess, I think, was part of this new API endpoint that I'm setting up. Was like, okay, so what is it about methods that's interesting to be able to link them to each other, and how can we form a narrative from that situation? I hope that answers.
Thank you. Yes, very sorry if I mispronounce a few names here. So IO asked, thank you for sharing this. Are you hoping to apply this program to other languages since it is written in English? I wonder how creators from non-English speaking backgrounds could use this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know I personally haven't played around with that too much. There is another dev ambassador who tried playing around with demos where they basically got Codex to write a poem and then translate it into a different language, I think Japanese. And I would definitely encourage you to try to play around with that as well. I think it'll be a lot better than we might think at doing some of that stuff.
Awesome, thank you. Roger Kenny asked, will coding interviews go away?
Gosh, you should definitely take this one. You're the interview guy right now.
I don't know, to be honest with you. I think it's really hard to make long-term predictions, or I hesitate to make any long-term predictions because, like I mentioned, like sometimes things change by the year. I feel like I never really know what's happening in a year, even though if anyone should have some sort of idea, it should be like one of us, I guess. But and so because of that, it's really hard for me to tell. And I think a lot of the decision makers around how coding interviews work, and a lot of the decision makers around like what AI products are built, are like two separate parties as well. And so because of that, how they think about things or what their understanding of what we do here is, I have no idea.
I would say broadly, to add on to that technology defines history. And we usually kind of think of it as the other way around sometimes because we get really stuck in the way that we see the world because it's our world, right? So it's really hard to have a battle with swords if swords weren't invented yet. It's the way that I like to think about it, right? So I think that these coding interviews are the way that they are because code is the way that it is. And if software engineering changes dramatically 20 years from now, the coding interviews that 5-year-olds now today are going to be doing 20 years from now, they're going to look back at us and be like, why were you guys using whiteboards? That's crazy. Like, why can't you just think your code into existence like we can? So it could be completely different.
Awesome. Steve asked, I just signed up for the beta. How long is the wait list? I hate waiting.
I am not too sure, to be completely honest. Maybe that's something we can get back to you on. But I thanks for being patient and thanks for signing up. I hope you can get it soon.
I will say I think that there are 2 separate waitlists, not 2, for Codex and GPT-3. So definitely sign up for both, and I think that they get viewed in parallel. So you might get into one before the other.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Andy asked, do you know of any interesting research or art happening in this space?
Yeah, so I'd say that it depends on what kind of art you're interested in, whether it's visual. If it's visual, then yes, there is some very exciting work that is going to be happening over the next soon. I can't really give an exact timetable because I don't know the timetable of when these models are slated to kind of hit the market. But we've seen some exciting stuff come out of OpenAI when they released that blog post for Dolly a few months ago, which I can write in the chat if people haven't seen that. It's spelled like the movie, the Disney movie. But I highly recommend checking that out if you're looking into like the art space and what natural language is going to be for art as well. So we saw what happens when natural language integrates with code, but what happens when natural language integrates with visual art and audio kind of art as well. So I would say keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and to add on to that, we have a ton of community members interested in art and research as well. If you've already gotten the beta invite, we do have an internal community forum. Like, consider browsing through that and checking out what people are working on or posting some of your own stuff. I'm sure you'll find tons of great stuff there, as you're already finding in the chat. Thanks, Jennifer, for mentioning that.
Next question I have is, Maria asked, how does this shift the way we teach code?
So I think that Yash and I will actually have a pretty interesting back and forth on this, because Yash is currently a student learning computer science, and I, studied computer science roughly a decade ago. So I think that the field has changed so much since I even learned how to code a decade ago. And I think that as someone who's on the other side of that and is now thinking pretty much daily about teaching code through a tool like stenography and making code easier to understand. And again, kind of as I mentioned earlier, what makes a good explanation versus a bad explanation? Like, is it an explanation that's a paragraph long or 2 sentences? And how, what's the intonation of it? What is it focusing on, et cetera, et cetera? I think teaching code in the future is going to be reliant off of understanding what students need and what's going to give them the best chance at creating what they want to with code. And I think that the reason that I phrase that like that is because I think code is probably the most powerful tool that I've run into ever, because of its flexibility, right? Like, if I have hammer, it's only for nails. If I have a shoe, it's for my foot, but it can't be something different. I can't make it another size shoe, even without completely breaking the shoe and remaking the shoe. But code is just inherently flexible. It's just a bunch of zeros and ones. It's a long mathematical tape. So anything that you can kind of imagine, you can create with code. And that, to me, is like beautiful. So I think, really enforce, like, in teaching that to students and informing them of the flexibility that they can have with that is something that I hope teachers get more focused on, instead of formatting code and, it needs to look like this and shape like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I also think, I don't necessarily think Codex is changing the direction that we're moving in terms of how we teach code, but rather just accelerating what's kind of already been happening. What I mean by that is, when you were writing code decades ago, it's like assembly, like all these really low level languages, and then you build languages on top of them with more and more abstractions that make writing code a lot easier. Like, for example, if I write code in something like Python, I don't ever have to worry about something like memory management or pointers, or very rarely you do. And I think Codex is just another continuation of that, like continuing to abstract some of the technical things that may be a little bit more tedious than they are like effective ways or things that are necessary to understand. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I think it's moving towards. And I think it's kind of already happening. People understand that the value of a software engineer isn't just understanding syntax and like being able to like decipher this programming language. It's a lot more than that. And I think, I can't speak for Graham or like what it was like for him, but in my experience, professors definitely recognize that and definitely place an emphasis on that. So I'm pretty optimistic on that front for sure.
Oh, Rachel, I think you're muted. So
Thank you for that. Thank you. We do have time for a few more questions. I do have a couple more. So if you guys have any more questions, please continue to write them down. So I had a question from Andy. I am interested in doing research and space art in this space. Do you have any recommendations or interest in collaborating or collaborators?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening with tools like Runway ML in particular too, and processing. And I spend a lot of time also thinking about like the generative design space. I think that it's a very cool space that it takes code, it turns it into something that doesn't necessarily need to have a logical output, but can just be something that's beautiful to look at and beautiful to conceive of. So I would really recommend looking into those tools, specifically, like I said, Runway ML, because these are Google Colab. These are tools that can, obviously, of course, GPT-3. These are tools that when you get access to them and can play around with them, allow you to have a very easy learning curve into creating art with code and kind of like continuing the research in that space. For the less machine learning type things, I do recommend things like processing and Sonic Pi if you're into making music, um, or title cycles as well. So those are the ones that I played with mainly.
Yeah, nothing too specific to add on to that because I've been playing with a lot of the similar things, a lot of the times with Bram, to be honest. So we've been kind of collaborating on that a lot.
Or Lens Studio, right? You know, I guess that's Snap, right? Like Lens
Yeah,
Studio is a
yeah.
very cool creative tech platform where you can make really cool machine learning stuff, especially with like depth in painting being a thing these days, and being able to occlude people from videos and show their background is really cool. So you can do all that in real time now. Segmentation work with stuff like Lens Studio.
Perfect. The next question I have is a little bit more personal. Stephen C asked, how did you get started with OpenAI and become cool dev ambassadors?
I can start that one. So I remember when I was in my senior year of high school, I was trying to work on these like AI projects, and nothing out there was really able to do what I needed it to do, particularly with a Q&A, meaning like you give the model a bunch of information, and then you ask it questions, and it tries to answer those questions. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, the tech isn't good enough yet. Oh, well, maybe in like 10 years from now, I'll come back. But then a year later, GPT-3 comes out and it can do everything I need it to do. And so for me, it was a lot of like, I had felt like a lot of the things I had been thinking about for a year had already been unlocked with GPT-3. So I kind of just like spent a lot of time playing around with it and just building a bunch of random demos and like putting them out there and then meeting new people through that. And then they come up with new ideas and then we work on new things together. And that's kind of how I got more involved and have stayed involved within this community. And then I guess OpenAI just kind of reached out, and then now I'm here.
I have a very similar story in a very different place in life, where I also was playing around with what is the edge abilities of artificial intelligence right now. Specifically, I was interested in using it to make improv comedy as amongst some other things at the time. That was like a big drive of mine, was just to make kind of comedy and art. And I needed something that could write rap music. And I was like, I don't want to write all these lyrics by myself, but I can hopefully train a machine to do that. So I played around with some very less than stellar results, and then I saw GPT-3 on Hacker News, and I was like, "Whoa, this feels like that." And I applied with that that message to the waitlist pretty much verbatim. Uploaded a bunch of demos, created a lot of stuff in the AR comedy space with artificial intelligence as well. And then I also, like Yash, got a message. They said he wanted to join the developer ambassador. So it was a very organic process is basically what I'm getting at. It wasn't intentional. Yash and I just happened to be really interested in what this technology could do and really interested in getting involved with the community. Yeah.
Awesome. Roger Kenny, my next question, Roger Kenny asks, is there a resource for live demos?
Funny you should ask. I actually made a website for this. It's called, I'll put it in the chat. It's called GPT Crush, gptcrush.com, I think. It just has a bunch of demos that people have been kind of working on over the past little bit. It's mainly with GPT-3. I don't think there's been as much Codex stuff on it yet. And I highly encourage you to check all of that stuff out. It gives you a good like background onto what the community has been interested in, what things people have been interested in building, and like it can even be like a jumping point for you to move a little bit ahead or move the needle ahead.
Awesome, thank you. I believe we may have answered all questions. I believe I did see one that we did not answer yet. I believe, I'm trying to find it. Give me 1 second here. I believe, I don't know if this is similar to a question you guys asked before. Toby said, really cool presentation. Thank you. Am I able to use this example of translating normal English into AI now?
Yes. I guess it's the way that I would answer that is twofold. So in terms of the English to code, yes, if you have access to Codex, you can go into the playground and start doing stuff like that. Today, for the other way around, for code to English, stenography is live. It's still very much in beta. I'm working on it every day, but it's very cool. I'm very happy with the results that it produces, and it's going to continue to get cooler, I promise. So yes to both. Faster to get stenography than maybe getting Codex, depending on how long the wait list is. But if you are in the Codex beta, then yes, everything that we showed to you today in the demo section is also available to you.
Awesome. We do have time for like 1 or 2 more questions. So I'm going to ask one more. Roger asked, Bram, did you feed the generative rap through a neural voice?
Funny that you mentioned that. I actually did. I read it through, I forget the name of the company. I think it's Resemble AI. There's a few competitors in the space that are doing some really cool things. Sonantic is another one, which I can put in the chat. Sonantic, and then Resemble. I think it was Resemble AI. I could be wrong about that. Yeah, I fed the results of GPT-3 through that model. I actually did that for a Skyrim mod as well. So I used Skyrim Character Creator to create a Questgiver, and then I created the dialogue with GPT-3 and then passed it through one of the neural voices that I had mentioned, and then I tied all those together. So it was kind of like a artificial intelligence fully given quest without a quest. It was just you can just talk to them. But yeah. So
I've done something similar too, except I basically just got, I think GPT-2 or GPT-3 to write a bunch of lyrics for me and write a bunch of chord progressions for me. And then I like brought out my guitar and like my MIDI keyboard and like I produced the whole thing, and then like I sang on it, and it was a ton of fun. And I think that like kind of brings back what we were talking about before about having like a symbiotic creative relationship where the AI isn't making all of the creative decisions. I'm not making all of the creative decisions. We kind of do it together in a way, and you kind of like bounce it off something and just see what you can come up with. And that is really fun. You can sink a lot of hours into playing around with that if you want to.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to you both. I believe we answered everyone's question in the chat box. That was very, very productive and interactive. Feel free, I believe you might have written it out in the chat already, but where can people find you? Where can people contact you? Please feel free to write in the chat. Thank you so much both for your time today. Just want to let the audience know that we will have a networking session at 1:15 p.m. And then we will also have our demos, our Chanel demos with synthetic media demos at 2 p.m. So please join us for the rest of the day for more exciting things. Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us, Rachel.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for moderating. This was amazing. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Really appreciate it.